Hey guys, this is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. In this video, we're going to be using GarageBand, but we're going to be focusing our attention on using the stock GarageBand plugins to really help shape and create the dimension that we're looking for in our tracks. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind you that if you're looking for professional guidance with helping you produce your own music, then I would encourage you to visit beatacademy.com. Take advantage of all the resources that are available for you there, the community, the accountability, and the mentorship opportunities to help you grow in producing your music. beatacademy.com, and I'll see you there. So here's a loop that I've put together with a couple instrument tracks and two loops that I found in the loop pack that comes here with GarageBand. And so I'm going to play all of them together, and then I'm going to walk you through some of the processing that I'm using with stock GarageBand plugins that really help create the depth and dimension that I was looking for. So I'm going to start with the first track here. Now this is a track loaded with the electronic drum kit Beat Machine. So once that was loaded, I just kind of had triggered some of the sounds here with my MIDI controller and just created this rhythm. Now, what you can't do in GarageBand is open the Ultra Beat, which is the instrument that GarageBand is put together for you on this track. You can't open it and tweak any of the settings. You can't mess around with the kick, snare, or hi-hat, anything like that. But I will show you some workarounds that can be very helpful if you are using GarageBand. So that's the instrument that it's using. Unfortunately, you can't really alter or change that, but you can add some processing here with stock plugins to really help create and shift. So by default, we have this. This is how the beat or this drum machine comes loaded. Now the compressor really isn't doing much. I actually just left it alone. But what we want to do is create some saturation, and saturation really does help glue tracks together, and it actually just really brings a nice element, nice characteristic to each individual track that when they are all compounded together, really does help glue the mix. So here is what I inserted, and I just basically clicked this arrow here, went over to distortion, and looked for an overdrive option. So right here I chose overdrive, and sometimes these plugins are shrunken a little bit, so I just move them to get a little bit of the faders. But very straightforward, as you can see, but these plugins do a great job of what it says, and it's overdrive. So we're adding some drive here. And I'm just basically making sure that when I crank the drive, I'm lowering the output too. And the tone is fine. But the lower the tone is, the more of a blanket you're putting on the drum. So around here, we'll make it nice and warm. So I wanted to keep the drums just like that. And then adding some bit crushing on here. So once again, this can also be found in distortion using the bit crusher here. This is going to give me the ability to just add a little bit, and it actually acts as a form of compression, but just a little bit of downgrading the actual sample and gives the grit that I'm looking for. There you go. It's just a hint of that. And then just using the EQ here, once again, just to go ahead and warm that up. But that's our foreground beat. Now, what I've done is I've duplicated the track, so I'll have the same exact rhythm. But what I'm going to do is load a different drum kit here. So we have the Gritty Funk, and I'm going to bypass all the plugins that's on here. So this is just a Gritty Funk. And what's important is I'm layering my first layer of drums, and that's important. I'm layering the first layer of drums to give some unique texture to them. So I've just copied the pattern, and instead of having maybe another snare or another clap or something like that mirror the same rhythm as the first snare drum, I'm going to look for a short sample, maybe something like a short shaker or a hi-hat or a rim knock, something like that, that will, add a little bit to the snare, but with making my first snare the prime spotlighted instrument. So that hi-hat works out pretty well. So let's layer these two together. Now, listening to that, it's like, doesn't really do much for me. But then what we're going to do is we're going to head over here to the mixing view, select track, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pitch shift this. So we're actually going to, in real time, we want to shift the pitch of this drum track as a whole down. And what that's going to do is create some really cool, unique textures. So just by going 6 semitones down and turning the mix all the way to 100%, you get this. So it pitches down the tom hit that we did and the hi-hat. And then using a distortion plugin here to really give some more of that saturated texture. So we're going to leave it at nasty. And just mess around with the drive. And the pre-gain. Just be sure that when you are adjusting the pre-gain and the drive, be sure to lower the output too. You don't want it just to be louder and automatically assume, oh, it's better because it's louder. That's not usually the case. And I have the mix at 100%. Similar to the first track, we're going to add some bit crushing. This is just going to get a little bit more. That helps warms it up as well. And here we're using the EQ to actually give a little bit of boost on the bottom end and lower a little bit more on the top end. So I'm going to warm it up, but yet beef up the bottom as well. And then we have this plugin here. It's a directional mix, and I'm getting this from imaging because what I want to do is create this. I want to widen up the signal a little bit. So I was looking for some kind of stereo spreader, but this actually helps here. So this would go, I chose the stereo to mono, but what I'm doing is I'm choosing, it's kind of almost like panning it, and I'm spreading it at the same time. It's going to do something really cool to it. This is without it. Put this back on. And now let's combine this now with their main foreground beat. So you hear when we layer that foreground beat, the main kick and snare beat, with just another drum kit, that really doesn't add life to it. But when we start adding the pitch shifting, the distortion, the bit crushing, the EQ, it really does give some cool dimension to it. So we'll put this back on. Now the shaker in that first track is a little too loud. So unfortunately, I can't go into the Ultra Beat plugin and just lower the volume of the shaker alone. So the way to work around that is in the actual MIDI window here, the actual note where the shaker is located, which would be this key here. I'm going to go to the velocity and just lower that number so that it's actually going to lower the output of that sound. And that helps just kind of tame the overall volume of that shaker because it's such a short and a high frequency item. It really is poking out, sticking out in the mix. And then I'm going to separate and create another track where then I can tame and have more control over the hi-hat. So this hi-hat comes from the same Beat Machine track here. I'm just breaking them off into individual tracks. So it gives me more control on the actual when they come in, as well as the overall volume as well. And I want to add a couple more effects to this as well. So here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add some overdrive. So you can see I'm adding overdrive, saturation, distortion. All these things really do help kind of beef up and glue these things together. And then the pitch shift here. Now, why pitch shift the hi-hat? Well, I couldn't go in the actual Ultra Beat and lower the pitch of the hi-hat. So I'm using this as a way to do that without having to open up the Ultra Beat plugin, which I don't have access to in GarageBand. But the workaround is using a pitch shifter like this to lower the pitch and detune it. And it actually just creates some really cool texture to the sound. And then the noise gate is what I'm using to actually just shorten and chop the sound up. It's actually adding less decay to the sound. So it helps it become a little bit more staccato. And then having EQ where this is copied from the other one. I don't really need this low end. So I can just go ahead and do a high pass, just let all the highs pass. And there you go. So that's kind of cool. So now let me go ahead and just play this. Let's play these first two tracks, the hi-hat, the first drum machines, just stock the way they come in GarageBand. So there's a big difference. And you can see that taking some time to adding some saturation and adding the texture does help get this in a whole nother place. Now, next we have these Chime Cords. Now, this is pulled right from the GarageBand loop library. Went just through genre-specific chill wave and found these chords. And then just dragged them into the project. What I've done is just on the actual track itself, I just dropped the pitch down 3 semitones. And then we're going to do some things to actually create some movement to this sound. So here's the sound on its own. And that's totally fine. But giving it a little bit character can help things move along nicely. So I'm going to use this EQ here. And I'm going to trim away some of the low end and the low mids as well, kind of thinning this out. That's also helpful if you're using loops that might have some bass in the presence. You can use this EQ to just take some of that out and just thin out the actual sample. And now we're going to use an auto filter here. And I'm getting this from the filter menu, choosing auto filter. This is going to help create some movement. And what it's doing is not just, I can use this as a regular filter. And I've got the resonance up, but I want to increase the intensity, so it's automatically filtering. It's adding somewhat of an LFO to this filter. So I'm going to lower the resonance so it's not so drastic. Now you can determine and change the rate here. So maybe every 1 bar. And we can determine, is it going up or triangle, mean up and down. So maybe just have it go up. And that helps just create some movement on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the reverb and the platinum verb on here. And this will give some nice dimension and space. And that's going to send this a little further back in the mix. So we'll go ahead and arm the rest of the tracks. And then next up, for the bass line, we have the heavy sub bass in the library that is in the bass category, and just choosing the heavy sub bass here. But what we're going to do is we're going to add some distortion and then use our channel EQ to just focus in on the low mids and mid and lows for this sound. So let's go ahead and do that now. We have the clip distortion here. So I'll take the EQ off. Nice and gritty. And then just use the EQ to really just take away a lot of that high end. That kind of helps it just hide underneath everything else. Now, here's an example of where using some of the plugins to create the texture can really help not only just affect a sound, but actually inspire maybe even a creative direction for that specific sound. So here is a glockenspiel. I really wasn't sure about using the glockenspiel until I spent some time tweaking around with the effects. Then I was really satisfied with the actual sound. So this is, 50% the sound design that sparks the inspiration, and then that really leads into, how this is going to fit with the rest of the tracks going on. So here's the glockenspiel. So let's listen to that with the rest of the track. Technically, yes, that works, but it doesn't really sit in the right vibe, or it's too bright, it's too pretty. So what we're going to do is start off with an EQ, just take away some of that shimmer away with the EQ, and then creating the atmosphere using the silver verb here. Now what's cool about this is I'm setting the wet, the wet is at 87% and the dry is at 53%. So we've got a little bit of the dry signal kind of trailing behind, so to speak, and you can kind of hear how it's actually adding somewhat of a rhythm to it. And then taking that sound and actually pitch shifting it down is creating some cool artifacts. So now I'm going a whole octave down and I'm mixing it about 93%. Now I know what you might be thinking, why not just play the part an octave down? Well, you don't get the same artifacts. It doesn't actually sound the same. It doesn't create the same textures as if running it through the pitch shifter. That's a big difference. And now we're going to create some slight detuning, and I'm going to use the tape delay to do that. So with this tape delay, I'm going to set it to a very fast time, almost like slap back at every 16th note. And what we're going to do is increase the LFO rate of one side so that the depth of that one side, so that the tuning and the modulation of that delay goes a little stronger than the other side, and it gives this detuning effect. So here's what we're doing. We're increasing the LFO depth. So I brought that down. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that. And just find a sweet spot with the rate that you like. But now that gives it a whole nother vibe. So this is what we started with. And now this is where we end up with. It's more haunting, it's fate, and actually fits well further in the back. Now to help kind of rhythmically bridge the gap, as you can see, we have the very open and sparse drum pattern here with the kick and snare. I'm going to use a drum loop found from the library here in GarageBand, but specifically a percussive loop. So again, here we have a Indian tabla loop. Now things tend to get a little bit grittier when they're pitched down, specifically percussive loops. So I'm purposely doing that. I'm transposing this -5 semitones so that I have, I add a little bit more of those artifacts to it. And then we're going to also do some EQing here, so I can kind of warm this up, take away some of the high end there. And I'm wanting to go ahead and take away some of the low end, because I'm really allowing the other drums to really focus in on that and the bass as well. And then adding a tremolo plugin to give some cool movement at every 8th note. What I'm doing is I'm setting the stereo phase to 0. So usually you want to have this at 180, so it just kind of goes back and forth. Right, so it's going back and forth. That's cool too, but if you set this at 0, it almost kind of just cancels out. So it's actually, treating this as somewhat like as a side chaining effect. I couldn't find a way to sidechain here in GarageBand, so this was the next thing here. So I'm trying to have the percussion loop just duck every 8th note and then come right back in. And we can increase this to maybe like every quarter note. And now let's see what that sounds like with everything else. Well, this goes to show that you can do so much with just the stock plugins that you have available to you right now. And sometimes it's just understanding how to use them to get the sounds and shaping the sounds you already have the way you want them to. Well, I hope this video has been helpful. And as my gift to you for watching this video, I'd love to put together a sample pack loaded with loops, construction kits that you can use in your DAW. It works in any DAW, whether it's GarageBand, Logic, Ableton Live, Studio One, your neighbor's calculator, whatever it is that you're using to make music these days. This sample pack will work perfectly for that. It's 100% royalty free, so you can drag and drop them and use them in your projects and share that music you're making with the rest of the world. I've also included in this sample pack templates for Ableton Live that you can see on my previous videos in this channel of when I break down popular charting songs so that you can go ahead and be inspired and use that in your projects as well. All this can be found by visiting beatacademy.com/pack or click the link below in the description box to download yours today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with upcoming videos, and I'll see you in the next video.